The presence of the Romaine hydropower complex changes the river's flow regime. Hydro-Québec has committed to conduct environmental follow-ups until 2040 to monitor changes in the environment and to assess the effectiveness of mitigation and compensation measures. The follow-up includes bathymetric and granulometric studies at the mouth of the Romaine.
Our study at the mouth of the Romaine has two components. With bathymetry, we're examining the relief of the riverbed. Granulometry involves looking at all types of sediment in the bed: gravel, sand, and pebbles. We check to see whether the bathymetry and granulometry at the mouth of the Romaine are changing, and whether this could have an impact on the habitats of eelgrass, soft-shell clams, and capelin. The study area is mainly the mouth of the Rivière Romaine, but to make comparisons and see whether changes have really occurred, we're also using 4 control areas, which are not affected by the Romaine hydropower project. These are the mouth of the Rivière Mégan, Baie des Trilobites, Baie Nickerson, and Baie Victor. To see if there are other differences, in our follow-up we'll compare our results with a baseline from 2013, which represents natural conditions, since back then there was no hydropower development on the river. The first aspect we study is bathymetry. We install a high-precision GPS system on a boat, along with an echo sounder. We travel back and forth across the bay to assess the depth. It's a bit like the echo sounder used to detect fish when fishing. At low tide, to complement the data we've collected from the boat, we go out on foot. We use a pole with a high-precision GPS to collect data as we walk across the sandbanks. In total, we'll gather data over about 80 kilometers from our boat trips and from waiting in the water with our GPS poles. When we come back for the next follow-up, we'll cover the exact same routes in order to compare the results. Our goal in analyzing the bathymetry at the mouth of the Romaine is to see whether the channels or sandbanks are moving laterally or changing shape. For example, a channel might become deeper and a sandbank could get larger or higher over time. With the granulometric study, we want to determine whether hydropower development changes the quantity or size of sediment arriving in the estuary. We use several tools. The first is the Ponar grab sampler. It's a jaw-like tool that we drop from a boat to the bottom of the bay. It collects a substrate sample, which we put in a container and keep for analysis. The second tool is a sediment core sampler, which we use to collect sediment from the substrate at low tide. Some samples we collect are stored for the lab. Once we have our samples, we can analyze them in 2 ways. The first is visual analysis, where we observe and touch the sediment and compare it with a chart to see whether it consists of fine, medium, or coarse sand or gravel. We also analyze our sediment sample by sending it to a lab. There, they will test it to determine exact percentages. For example, 40% sand, 35% fine sand, and so on. In one campaign, we collect about 300 samples. We can see whether the size or quantity of the sediment has changed since the last follow-up. For example, there might be a lot more or less sand than before. These differences could affect the habitat of eelgrass, soft-shell clams, and capelin. Our results so far confirm what we anticipated in the impact assessment. In terms of both granulometry and bathymetry, we've seen only minor changes compared to the natural conditions we recorded in 2013, as well as in the control areas. This means that the changes we've seen so far are due to natural variations in the environment, such as the impact of tides, currents, and maritime storms. Our next follow-ups will allow us to add to these results.
Les résultats actuels.